One of the easiest ways to step into the idea of object-oriented programming is to begin by building simple utility classes, classes that can take some complicated code and abstract that way to an elegant interface. So in this lesson, also as we learn about static methods and properties, let's build a helper HTML class. So the first step would be to build a classes folder. And now within that folder, let's create a new file, and we're going to call this html.php. So within here, the first thing is we're going to create our HTML class. So what is this responsible for? Well, when we're in our view, rather than, for example, running a for each statement so that we can echo out some list items, instead what we want to be able to do is run something like HTML, and we're going to call the li method, which stands for list item, of course, or we could call it list. And then we could pass it an array of items. And what's going to happen is behind the scenes, that's going to build the necessary markup. Or maybe we would have an anchor, and that would set up an appropriate link. Now, it's possible at first you might think, well, that's really not necessary. What's wrong with doing HTML? But there's certainly going to be instances when that's extremely helpful. And I'll describe more of those throughout this lesson. Let's go ahead by beginning with the easiest one, the anchor tag. So we will create a new method called anchor, public function anchor. And within here, let's simply return an anchor tag like this. And now we need to populate it with the values that the user passes. So when they call the anchor method, they're first going to give it the href, and they're also going to give it a value, or we can call that text. So now it's simply a matter of just inserting it here, href and text. Like so. All right, let's test this out on our page. And notice that we're doing this kind of manual testing. Wouldn't it be easy if we had this way where it would automatically run tests? So I don't have to always run this every single time to make sure that it returns what I expect. I can just run an automated test that will do it for me. And that's beyond the scope of this course, but we do have a course coming on test-driven development in PHP, and I highly recommend you view that. All right, so let's test it out manually. And we're going to run HTML, but the problem is the way it is right now, we would have to create a new instance. So we'd have to do something like this. HTML equals a new instance of the HTML class, and then we'd have to run HTML anchor, and we'll give it to tutsplus.com, and the text is tutsplus premium. All right, so let's echo that out and see if it worked. And here we are. I've gone directly to our class file, and now we run it, and if I view the source, sure enough, we do get an anchor tag. Good. But the problem is, as you can imagine, this is still too much writing. What I'd rather do is use a static method. And an easy way to think of a static method is it's not dependent upon any instance variables. So we can call the method without creating a new instance of the class. We declare a static method by running public static function anchor. And now take a look at how we can use it. We can get rid of all of this, and now we simply reference the class, colon, and then the name of the method, like so. Now let's try it one more time, and we're getting the exact same effect, but now this is a lot cleaner. So let's get this out of our class file, and back to index.php, we're going to include it, of course, require classes html.php, and we could load a view, but for now I'm just going to put it all on one page, like so. And now I can open up PHP and echo HTML anchor. One more time, tutsplus.com, tutsplus premium. And now if I view that in the browser, we have a nice anchor tag. So what else could we do with this HTML class? Well, let's implement that list idea. So public static function list, and it will accept an array of items. So now let's think, how do we want to do this? Well, first we want to return an unordered list, and then a bunch of list items containing each item respectively. So your first instinct is probably to use a for each statement, and you could do that, but I'll show you an easier way using implode. Let's return an opening UL, then an opening list item, and then we're going to concatenate, and we're going to implode, and we're going to separate each one by a closing list item and an opening list item, items like that. Finally, we're going to close the last list item and the unordered list. So don't worry if that's confusing. Let's just see if it works. Get rid of all of this, and now HTML, list, And let's provide it with some list items. Item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, like that. Now, if we run this in the browser, though, you're going to get a warning. Run it. Yep, we get unexpected list. And that's because that is a unique keyword. So what we need to do is change that. So let's change it to items, like so. Now we'll change that to, we're going to echo out some items. Now if we run it, sure enough, we do get an unordered list. And if I view it, notice how that works. All right, let's decode that. First, how does implode work? Well, implode is going to take that array and turn it into a string. So most of the time you'll see things like this, implode and separate it with a comma, like that. And that would take your items, item 1, and separate each one with a comma like that. However, if we instead separate them with a closing list item and an opening one, now we get this, like that. So notice that we are building the markup. So all we have to do at that point is add the opening UL and the list item at the beginning and the closing list item and UL at the end. And then you get a formatted list. So remember, you don't always have to use for each statement. See if there's maybe a more clever way and shorter way to do it. And this works fine. Now, what if we want to set a base URL? So if we go back a handful of clicks to when we had our anchor tag, rather than linking to an absolute URL, maybe we want to link to a relative URL, like about/index.php. So if I run that, we're going to get a link to about/index.php, of course. But sometimes it's helpful to turn your relative links into absolute links. And you could do that by setting a base URL. Now, normally this would be set in your global configuration file, but in this case, let's just put it directly into the HTML. So we'll say public static base URL, and in this case, it's going to be localhost 8888, because that's what I have here. On your system, it might be different. Again, this would probably not rest in this class. You would get it outside of another class. But now we can run base URL, and then the href. And let's go ahead and add the / to the end of the base URL. But now if we run it, view it, nope, why isn't that working? Well, you're trying to access base URL like it's a regular local variable, but it's not. You have to access it differently. Instead, to refer to the class, we cannot use this because this would refer to the instance. And we don't have an instance in this case because we're using static methods. So instead, we want to refer to the class itself, and you can do that via self. So let's close out our quotes and separate this, and I run self, base URL, then we add on the href, and then we can continue on. Now, if we view it one more time, and we view the source, now we have an absolute link. And this is the sort of convenience that these helper methods can offer us. Rather than having to figure out what that URL is and hard code it, we can store it in one location and then call a simple helper method that will take care of that for you. So maybe let's do one more for images. So public static function image, and that will accept the source and the alt text. But I'm going to set that to blank because it's not going to be required. So in this case, we know we're going to return an image like that. Now let's simply populate the values. All right, let's try it out. I'm going to go back to Chrome, and I will visit a site like NetTouch and just grab a quick image so that we have something to work with. Of course, never hot link, but it's okay when it's an Envato site. Now we're going to open up PHP again, HTML, image. Here's the source, and the alt text will be node.js. Now we view it, and sure enough, we do get that image like we would hope. Very cool. So let's come back, and we're going to leave it at that, but I want you to do some stuff on your own. So right now, we're only dealing with HTML, but remember, an HTML class can be for methods related to anything revolving around your HTML. Maybe you want to have a helper method that takes care of converting entities or escaping characters. You could put that in this class as well. So on your own, I want you to see if you can implement a static method called script. And when you call that method, what that's going to do is output a script tag. However, you should also expand it so that you can optionally pass an array of script sources. And if you do, it will filter through those sources and echo out the necessary number of script tags. And see if you can figure out how to do that. finally, I want you to think a little bit more elegantly. So the way you name your methods is equally important as the way you use them. What is the most expressive way? Should we use anchor, or would it be a little more readable if we called it link? We're going to echo out a link rather than something like anchor. The same thing with items. Well, items could refer to a lot. Why don't we change it to UL? Or if you can think of something better, then use that. And then finally, image is fine. Okay, I will see you in the next lesson where we will build a file utility class.